Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. I hope you'll all check out the all-new Zibby Mag, Zibby-Mag, the literary lifestyle destination with essays, book news, a lit lifestyle feature, and even some classes. Check it out, zibbymag.com. Claire Messud is the author of A Dream Life. She's also the author of many other books, including the best-selling novels The Emperor's Children, which, by the way, I read and loved, The Woman Upstairs, also read that, and The Burning Girl. She lives with her family in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and teaches at Harvard University. You may have heard of it. All proceeds from the publication of her new novel, A Dream Life, go to WIRES, an Australian wildlife rescue organization. Welcome, Claire. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss A Dream Life and your whole life and Emperor's Children and everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Zibby, for having me. It's great to be here.
I was so excited when this new book came out because I read The Emperor's Children with my book group before I did any of this stuff, when I was just like a hardcore reader, which is what I usually was. But I remember that so well, and just having the book next to my bed for so long and delving so deep into those characters. And I remember scenes in my head. And anyway, so I was very excited when your new book came out, especially because it's not even a fraction as long as the last book.
Well, there have been a couple of books in between, but this one, this one is short. And in fact, it does say, I think they call it a novel, but in my mind, it was a novella. I'm a big believer in the novella. I don't know if you are, as I am, a fan of Alice Munro, the short story writer, and she always, or she certainly at one time said, I pity novelists because I fit everything I want to say into 30 pages, which sort of, seems the ideal. I mean, a novella is a bit longer than that, but I feel like how great if you can fit a whole novel into a story, wonderful, So as a reader, I really love a kind of shorter form. I do.
I was actually just talking last night. I did an event with Annabelle Moynihan, who wrote Nora Goes Off Script. And she said her first draft of that was 90 pages. And she told all her writer friends, she's like, I wrote my novel. It's done. It's 90 pages. And they're like, that's not a novel. And she's like, and then she said she went and bought The Bridges of Madison County and was like, that's 90 pages too. And everybody read that book. And that was a book. So,
Right. I feel like, who gets to decide what's a novel? What's not a novel? I think that about all sorts of categories that seem to me more about publishers trying to reach readers rather than about the things themselves,
Yes. Also, nobody has time these days for anything, right? It's like, if we're going to argue for reading, which I am, and then how great to have a shorter alternative, which is just as impactful. Like, who's to say that's less valuable? Right. Like, I think it's probably more, it might fit in more with your lifestyle. So anyway, if it's reading and it's a story and it's a connection, labels aside.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. And I mean, it's like, is a meal better if it's bigger?
I mean, yes. No, I'm kidding.
Not necessarily, right?
No, I'm kidding. No.
It really depends.
It's true. No, it's not always better. No, especially lunch. I don't like big lunches. But anyway, okay. Well, why don't you talk about where this particular novella, novel, whatever we want to call it, sort of came from, and like, why write this now, and your general
So the sort of extraordinary thing is that I didn't write this now. So
okay.
I didn't. About 20 years ago, I published a book of novellas, and there were 2 novellas in that book. And in my mind, there were going to be 3. And then I had given this to someone to read to a writer who was, older and more established and who was very nice. But he said, it has no plot, it's not enough happens. And so then I was ashamed of it, and I didn't show it to my agent. I didn't show it to my editor. I put it in a drawer. And what happened, which I find sort of serendipitous, is that a couple of years ago, Gemma Burrell, who set up Tableau Tales, and I had met her because she used to run the Sydney Writers Festival. And she had invited me to attend that now, like 8 years ago. But she wrote and she said, I'm doing this thing. You wouldn't happen to have a shortish novel. Like, who has a shortish novel? And in the drawer, I was like, yeah. But she said, my hope is that that people will be willing to do this and donate the proceeds to charity. And for me, suddenly she was in Australia, right? And I had this novella in a drawer, or novel in a drawer that was set in Australia. And I was like, that's what are the odds?
Yeah.
And what are the odds? And I said, well, listen, see what you think. You may feel as my friend did that all those years ago, that it doesn't have enough plot or whatever. But if you'd like it, I would love to give it, for this venture, and the proceeds all go to saving wildlife, to the Wires Rescue. So it's an organization that saves wildlife from the wildfires in Australia, which are really bad scene. So there is, I think there is for me this funny thing that it isn't of just now, but it's still, when I took it out of the drawer and read it, I was like, oh, I'm still, I still believe in this. I still have my heart in this. And that's in part because it's, I think, based a little on my childhood. So it's trying to imagine what it was like for my mother as a sort of, stay-at-home mom in the early 70s. And in that time, many a wife and mom packed up and went where her husband's job took them and had to begin again. And I think for my mother to be told, and now we're moving to Australia, was really like, what? That's 50 years ago, basically. It really seemed far away. You couldn't, the telephone calls were difficult. Travel was very lengthy and expensive. So it really was, it wasn't quite like 1800 setting off on a sailing ship, but it was really a huge move. And I would, that's what I was trying to imagine, was what was that like for not, it's a fictional character. It's not my mom, but for somebody like that, to be leaving behind everything they knew, and all the context, all the sort of threads that make you who you are, or that you believe make you who you are, the connections and the friendships and the deli that and the post office that you use, and the doctor who's been your doctor since you were 18, like all those things vanish and you're beginning again. And in this case, she sort of gets caught up in inventing a persona that isn't necessarily that close to who she might otherwise be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like travel in the quote olden days, it was like you were off the grid completely, no matter where you were. Like we would go away for spring break and I would be like, I can't wait to reunite with my friends. And I would get off the airplane and run to the closest payphone and like call them from the payphone. Like, why couldn't I have just called them from wherever I was? But I don't know. There was something about like being home, and then you could be in touch again. And when you were gone, so sometimes I'm even like, well, I can't get in touch with so-and-so because I know she's traveling to Italy. And then I'm like, she's probably checking her email like every 2 seconds anyway. But there's still that lingering, like, oh, she's away. So do you still have that?
Totally. And it's true. Anytime a friend leaves the country, I'm like, well, I'll text her when she gets back.
Exactly.
She still has cell service in Sweden. Come on.
I know. It's exactly the same. It's like, yeah, I can't seem to let that one go. But your character, she also has this massive house to take care of. Like they move into this beautiful place that is really hard for her to manage herself. And she has two kids, right? Okay, I read this a little bit ago. She has 2 kids and she has this massive house, and she's trying to find like a house cleaner, and like randomly recruits this young girl who's like, doesn't know what she's doing either. And, it's also sort of the trappings of privilege doesn't always make it so great. Like you think from the outside, maybe that having this massive, beautiful house is so perfect. And yet it's overwhelming. She can't manage it. She can't keep it clean. She can't. And so she's really stressed out. And yet to others, it looks like the perfect life. And I love that peek inside to say like, nothing is just exactly what it seems. You don't know what's going on inside anyone's house.
Totally, totally. And I also think, I mean, for me in my head, the part of the story was that the people she comes to know best or encounter most are the people she's employing to help her.
Right.
Like it's actually, she's building this kind of fortress around herself of, there's the house comes with a gardener. They have to employ the gardener, and she doesn't really get on with the gardener so well. And then like as part of her husband's job, she has to give parties. So there's a caterer.
Right. Oh yeah. The tent. They were like fighting. Yes.
And the caterer's super bossy. The caterer's like, you're going to do this. And the gardener's bossy. Like, and then she hires this housekeeper to live in who she thinks, wow, she's great. She's going to be my friend. And then, and they are friends, but that woman's totally her own weird person. And I think for me in my head, that woman whose name is Simone, right? She's living much more the life she wants. Like she's living life on her own terms, not necessarily fully straightforward terms, but she's totally living life on her own terms.
But she leaves soon too, didn't she? She leave?
Yes, she leaves too. She literally leaves in the dead of night, you know? Yeah. And I think, the idea is like, oh, how terrible. She's not fulfilling her role. But in my head at the same time, she's not fulfilling her role, but like, she's like doing her thing, whereas Allison, the main character is, she's pretty constrained by all of this stuff and has been made by all of them, like by convention. Yep. Like all of these people are like, this is what you need to do. You need to hire a housekeeper. You need to do this. You need to have this kind of party. You need to wear these clothes. And I feel like we're all of us in our lives in varying degrees involved in versions of that. I'm interestingly just reading a novel that's being translated from French by a woman who was a lawyer. She comes from a very fancy French family. She's a lawyer, married with a child. And at some moment, like 8 years ago, she like chucked it all over, including being a lawyer. She's now queer and she cut off all her hair and she got tattoos. And like she lives on the margins in the tiny studio and, hardly has enough money. And she just, all of the things like nice clothes and car, like she just chucked it over. And it's so interesting to read that because you realize, wow, that's really courageous, not just for herself, right? But in the eyes of the world, right? That we're always navigating both our inner selves and then the eyes of the world. Like, what would it mean to live in that big house and let the weeds grow up, to 6 feet, and the windows get really dirty and never change the laundry, like never wash the laundry? What would that mean? Everybody would be whispering.
Well, and I mean, I think only certain personality types could handle that.
Yeah.
Like I would not be able to handle that. Like that would give me so much anxiety to see all that dirt. Like I would just be scrubbing.
Totally. Me too. And so, I mean, but it's a really interesting question. Like, would your 5-year-old self have felt that? Or were you sort of trained over, like, is that an innate?
Oh yeah.
Were you trained over time to be that person? We don't know. We can't find out.
Actually, I think I was much more comfortable with mess when I was younger because I have this distinct memory when I would come in like from swim in the summertime and like throw my towel somewhere. And my mom would say things like, you have to take care of this house. Like you can't just throw your towels everywhere. And I'm like, but it's our house. Like why can I not put my towel somewhere? Don't we live here? Like what is why does it have to be so perfect all the time? So yeah, maybe I'm going to scratch that and say, this is something I've created. I've created my own monster. So,
or a series of circumstances, parents, school, college, life. Right. And also like when you have to deal with the mess yourself, it's like, no, it's not nice. I don't like it.
But to your point, you are very much judged. Like if somebody were to come over and your house was filthy and unkempt, like that would be a reflection on you.
Right.
Right. So
yes. My house is a total mess. So it is
like, not. I'm looking at your room. You seem very,
I make a distinction though, like messy and dirty. I'm not dirty. I'm just messy.
Yeah. That's totally different.
Totally different. There are piles of books everywhere, but I dust the piles of books.
But that's great. That's just aesthetic. That's an aesthetic choice.
Clutter. I'm all for clutter. Mess.
Clutter. Yeah.
But we're reading, there's that I feel you, I don't know if you cited it before. There's a wonderful line from the writer Rebecca West about 100 years ago. And she said, a house uncleaned is better than a life unlived.
I like that. Yes. Well, you can get caught in the trap of just, it's almost like a navel gazing, right? If you're just too much cleaning and making things perfect, then how do you break out of that and be unpredictable? And anyway, and come out with a novella, perhaps. How can we go back for just 2 seconds? Like, how did you get your start writing? How did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I think I loved stories as a kid, and I loved being read to. And then when I could read, I was like, oh my God, I can read. I can just take the stories and run, I was always the kid in the back of the car reading, or the kid, I remember my mother yelling at me because she thought I was sleeping in, and she thought she was being really nice and letting me sleep in, but I'd been awake since 6 a.m. reading a book in my bed. And, I was that kid. So when I discovered pretty early that stories were not like rocks and trees, like that they hadn't always been there, that people made them up. I was like, oh, that's a thing we can do. Yeah. So then the question was always, how do you find a way to eat and have a roof over your head, and do that. So, but that which still working on that, but.
And how did you, what was your first break?
So I wrote my first novel. I'm an MFA dropout, and I had started as an undergrad some stories about some characters, and then I was turning that into a novel. I started an MFA, and it was at Syracuse, and my now husband was in London, and I was lonely, and back to the pre-internet, it was far and it was hard, and so I dropped out and went back to London, and I got a job. I feel like this was really the sort of moment of great good fortune is that I got a job working on a newspaper, the Guardian newspaper. I was a sort of junior person on what was called, I don't know if it still exists, the women's page, which wasn't recipes and knitting. It had been started in the 1920s as a sort of feminist thing. And it was very interesting. It was interviews with politicians and peace activists and also writers. And the boss my editor was not that interested herself. And so she handed me the writer stuff. And it meant that I got to know a bunch of sort of publicists and editors around town because they were sort of pitching to me for pieces in the newspaper. And when I finished my novel, there were several of them who'd said, I'll have a look. And so the woman who's still my British editor, who's about my age, liked it my first novel well enough to publish it, which was wonderful. I always think, at that time, she and my agent were going out. And I always think that if they hadn't been going out, I would never have been published, but
Oh, that's so funny. Oh my gosh. And when you wrote, just because I remember loving Emperor's Children so much, tell me about writing that and the process of that book and weaving together all those different, how did you go about that? What, and is your process the same? Does it course through all of the different books? Where you write, how you, all of that in terms of process?
Sure. So, that book, I had started a novel and I was really kind of struggling with it. And I had a baby. So in July of 2001, I had a baby. And then in September of 2001, there was 9/11. And my novel, which was set in New York about young people, was like, wow, I can't write the novel I thought I was going to write. Yep. And I had to, there was sort of I think the better part of a year, where I didn't know whether to write fiction at all. I mean, I also had a little baby. She's turning 21 next week. So, and I started some things, my husband he's just like, keep going. He doesn't say at the beginning, that's terrible, usually. But with the stuff I was starting at that point, he was like, that don't continue with that. No, not that one. So there was sort of three kind of totally abortive attempts. And then I went back to these characters and I started again. And in a funny way, I had more compassion, for them because I felt like history dealt this hideous blow, right? That maybe they were self-absorbed or kind of, I don't know, vain in certain ways or whatever, but we're all people and I didn't need to be satirical. I mean, I feel there's satirical elements in the novel, but I didn't need to to be satirical. Like I had compassion for them. They were totally real to me in light of, I think made more so by the tragedy of the world. And the thing I would say about writing it is then I had another child. So I was like, you know how it is. I don't even remember. I was writing little dribs and drabs. The chapters in that novel are really short because that's what I could manage. Like I could manage a short chapter. I could keep my focus on it. Before I'd always been somebody who wrote and then I'd go back over it and over it. No, by the time I finished it, there'd been like 40 drafts of something. No, no, this was just like, I got to keep going. I write by hand.
Wow.
In a notebook.
Still?
And still. And I had to kind of I just had to keep going forward. Right. I couldn't. And that was useful because because I think with kids, you have to do that. You don't have the luxury of time in the same way. For a really long time, you don't have the luxury of time in the same way. And maybe in the digital world, we never again have the luxury of time in the way that we did.
Don't say that, please.
Do you know what I mean? Right? Like there's so much, we're all bombarded with so much. So I feel like it was a good training for me to learn, like you can just keep going. Like the world doesn't fall apart and it's okay.
Doesn't it? I feel like the scene that I remember most vividly is this dinner party scene and getting ready for a dinner party. Did I make that up or was that in the beginning of the book?
I don't know. I don't remember.
I'm going to have to go back. I have like this whole apartment in my head and like a couple and this whole pre-dinner party preparation, but
it could be, it's not something that it comes immediately. I feel like I'm trying to think if that would be I don't know.
Maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to go back and look. I don't know. I shouldn't even have said anything out loud.
It could well be. I have the memory of a sib. It's a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, okay. Thanks for going easy on me. Okay. What project is next for you? And then I'll let you go.
Well, thank you for asking. Yeah, I am in the middle of a novel that is sort of based on, I've never written anything autobiographical before. And it's not autobiographical in the sense of being about me, but it's a novel that sort of that takes the trajectory of my father's life. And it's fiction, stuff is made up, but his life was odd, in the way I think of many 20th century lives. So, the world he was born into, my father's family was Pieds Noirs. They were French colonials in Algeria. And of course he was born in 1931. And then there was the war. And then after that, there was the War of Algerian Independence. And by 1962, Algeria was independent, as absolutely should have happened. But what it meant was that a lot of people were displaced and had what they thought of as home no longer existed. The world that they thought of as home was a vanished world, which happened to so many people in more dramatic circumstances, of course, in the 20th century. But this gave me a sort of almost coat hanger or a sort of frame on which to kind of build a story or shape a story. Because, of course, here I am, I'm an American person, and in my frame of reference for everything is so far. And he traveled, he traveled from that world to, he died in Stamford, Connecticut, so it was a long journey. And as he was near death, he was not religious, but his sister my aunt was very religious, and she wanted somebody to come and give him the last rites. And he said to me, is there somebody who could do it in French?
Oh.
Because the last time he had any religious involvement, it was when he was young and French. And I said, I don't think so, Daddy. I don't think I can find somebody. But so, it's just that arc is, but I think to me, it feels so common of this era. Yeah. We all move around, Wow.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Thank you, Claire. I want to post a picture, I think, of us wearing our identical glasses.
Our matching glasses.
Right? I feel like we should be on the Caddis website or something as sponsors. But anyway, it was lovely chatting with you. Thank you so much. And
with you. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.